The atmosphere in the Serra was heavy, humid, and dense, producing a light mist that adhered to the wooden walls. The soft hiss of water striking the heated stones introduced a rhythmic sound to the otherwise silent chamber. A woman reclined against the warm wooden slather, eyes closed in relaxation. She was in her early 40s, exhibiting a subtle sheen of perspiration on her skin. Her stepson had previously joined her seated opposite her with both of them enveloped into wells. He remained stunned, perceiving the tension in the atmosphere, although it was not their initial encounter. In solitude, the proximity of the Serra rendered the atmosphere distinctly altered and more electrified. His gaze shifted to her intermittently, observing the rise and fall of her chest with each deep inhalation, droplets of sweat coursing along her collarbone and down her neck. Please subscribe to my channel to enable the continuation of captivating, genuine stories like this one, and ensure you watch this video in its entirety, as the narrative promises to be exceptionally engaging. Are you? Well? Her gentle voice disrupted the silence with a playful undertone. When she opened her eyes and observed him gazing at her, a subtle smile forming on her lips. Yes, it is quite warm in here. Here, responded, squirming uncomfortably. She laughed and leaned forward slightly, allowing her towel to drop and expose more of her shoulder. That is the purpose of a SAA. She taunted. His gaze tracked the movement, and his heart quickened, has swiftly diverted his attention, attempting to concentrate on anything other than their proximity, the heat amplifying not only from the steam, but also from the unspoken tension in the room. You've been quiet today. Sure, marked her tone, gentle and almost coaxing. Is something on your mind? He hesitated, uncertain how to respond. Without revealing too much, just contemplating things, she replied vaguely, running a hand through his damp hair, chaired again, resting her head against the wall and closing her eyes. You can talk to me. You know we've always been able to communicate, right? He nodded, but she was unable to perceive it. The silence extended, accompanied solely by the sound of steam permeating the atmosphere. He was on the verge of altering the topic when she shifted once more. Her towel slipped lower entirely, revealing her shoulder. Perhaps it's merely the heat, she whispered gently, almost in a whisper, but it feels different in here, doesn't it? His breath became constricted in his throat. Indeed, it does, he responded. She opened, her eyes locking, her gaze with his for the first time, exhibiting an expression that had before been absent. She grinned gradually, as though she comprehended just what he was contemplating. Join me, she instructed, gesturing to the vacant spot beside Heron. The bench. He paused briefly, then rose and traversed the brief distances separating them, taking a seat in proximity, such that their legs almost made contact. The warmth of her skin, coupled with the steam, accelerated his pulse for a brief moment. Neither spoke. She arched her neck back, releasing a soft sigh. I reflect on how much you've matured, she murmured, her tone low and almost intimate. You are no longer that child. His throat constricted not. Due to the warmth you've consistently reported, replied softly, his gaze locked on her, attempting to comprehend the unfolding situation. And I always will be, she responded gently, her voice imbued with significance. The stillness extended once more, however. This time it bore a distinct quality. An electric tension permeated the atmosphere, something unarticulated, yet sensed by both individuals. I should probably leave, he stated abruptly, yet remained stationary. It seemed the appropriate sentiment, yet every instinct urged him to remain. She briefly turned her head to gaze at him before her eyes descended slightly. She said, barely audible, yet unmistakable, causing his breath to hitch. He was at a loss for words, but his body reacted too. The proximity, warmth, and gentle illumination of the assay, all of which merged into a singular experience. She extended her fingers, lightly grazing his hand. "And it is acceptable," she said, her tone a blend of comfort and a more profound sentiment. He gulped the contact of her hand, eliciting a jolt within him. "Feels distinct," he remarked, his voice scarcely audible. She concurred, her hand resting on his, her thumb caressing his skin. "However perhaps different, is not necessarily detrimental." He turned to face her, their faces only inches apart, the heat, tension, and proximity overwhelming. He instinctively leaned until their foreheads made contact. She did not withdraw. She embraced the moment, their breath warm across his lips. The steam hissed once more, yet neither acknowledged it. The sole focus was rapidly diminishing, space between. Then her hand ascended his arm slowly and purposefully until it settled on the nape of his neck. He trembled at her touch, his body responding to the intimacy. "This feels," he began, but the words eluded him. She muttered, her lips grazings, hissing the gentlest of kisses, creating amourment frozen in time. The warmth of the surroundings mingled with the heat between them, the tension palpable and laden with unexpressed emotions, although her lips barely contacted his. The significance of that touch reverberated. Through him, it was not merely the kiss, but the significance of the threshold. They were on the verge of crossing. Upon crossing, he hesitated momentarily, uncertain whether to retreat or plunge forward. However, his body dictated the course of action. She withdrew initially, albeit with a little breath. Her eyes scrutinized his, quietly seeking consent to proceed. He gulped, his heartbeat reverberating in his ear. "Sought not to engage in this," he said, his voice subdued and raspy. But as the words escaped his mouth, his body contradicted. Him he remained, stationary in fact. He leaned in a little, further, his gaze descending to her lips. "I understand," she said in a barely audible tone above the steam's hiss, but it seemed she faltered, unable to articulate the appropriate words. Her hands remained on his neck, her fingers delicately toying with his damp hair, without uttering another word. She leaned in once more, this time pressing her lips to his with greater intention. It was not a hurried kiss, but one imbued with significance, as if all that was unspoken had culminated. In this moment he responded instinctively, his chin finding her waist and drawing her closer, the warmth of her skin against his quickened heartbeat. The kiss deepened gradually, their breaths intertwining in the humid atmosphere, her body pressing against his. The towel that barely clung to her slipped lower fully, exposing her, and he felt her body shift beneath his touch. The warmth of her flesh and the steam amalgamating produced a potent blend of sensations. As his hands encircled her waist, she tilted her head back, allowing him to kiss along her neck. Each caress elicited shiver down her spine, prompting a soft sigh to escape her lips. Her fingers clutched his shoulders as he descended lower, intensifying the tension between them with each passing moment. "Are you certain about this?" he murmured, his voice laden with desire, yet tinged with hesitation. She leaned back slightly, locking eyes with him. She mumbled that she had never been more certain of anything before he could reply. She kissed him once again, this one more ravenous than the previous. Let his hands traverse down her back, locating the knot of her towel. I instinctively pulled softly, causing the fabric to slide away and reveal her completely to him. She inhaled sharply, but did not attempt to prevent him. Instead, she allowed the towel to drop entirely, rendering herself exposed. Although the expression in her eyes indicated a sense of control, his breath halted and his heart accelerated as his hands traversed her exposed skin. She drew nearer her body, reacting to his caress while they kissed. Their actions were her languid and intentional, as if time were irrelevant. The sound as heat seems to amplify each touch, rendering it more exhilarating. "You are exceedingly beautiful," he muttered, his voice strained with emotion, his hands gently caressing her form. She grinned at him, her lips curled in a manner that accelerated his heart rate. "You consistently articulate the appropriate response," she jested lightly, yet the gravity in her gaze was evident. They embraced briefly, their forehead touching, their breath shallow. Say was quiet except for the sound of the steam and the beating of their hearts. She shifted slightly, her leg brushing against his as she adjusted her positions, ending a jolt of sensation through him. He responded by pulling her even closer. Their bodies pressed flesh against each other. Now her TL, which had been hanging on by a thread, slipped further down, leaving her fully exposed. She didn't seem to mind. In fact, the vulnerability seemed to embolden her. She leaned back against the warm wooden wall. Pulling him with her, her hands found the knot of his towel, and with one quick tug, it unraveled and fell away. He gasped, his heart pounding as he felt her body against his, unimpeded by fabric. The heat of the Sarah combined with the heat from their skin was overwhelming, as thought the walls were closing in on them. There was thick and heavy, with the scent of sweat and desire for a moment. They stood there, pressed against each other, breathing heavily. The intensity of them was dizzying, neither of them able to speak, their eyes locked as they tried to understand what was happening in between them. Then her hands were on him again, exploring his chest, his arms her touch light and teasing. He groaned softly, his hands tracing her back, feeling the curve of her spine. It felt as though he was losing control, the desire that had been simmering between them for so long, finally coming to a boil. She leaned and pressing her lips to his neck, her breath warm against his skin. He shuddered, his fingers digging into her hips as he pulled her even closer. Their bodies were pressed together as though they were one. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her voice low and frantic. "Is this acceptable?" He nodded, rendered speechless, his eyes wide as he gazed at her. She smiled gently, going in for another kiss, this one deeper and more urgent. They sunk into the bench, their bodies moving together in an automatic rhythm, primal. The heat of the Sarah made everything feel more intense. Their skin was slick with sweat, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they explored each other. Time seemed to blur us. They continued each touch, each kiss, drawing them closer together. The steam had long since dissipated, but the heat between them only grew stronger. It felt as though the world outside the ease coexist, leaving just the two of them lost in the moment. After what felt like hours, they finally slowed, their bodies exhausted but satisfied. She rested her head on his chest, their legs tangled together as they lay on the bench, the afterglow of their shared experience washed over them. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as they lay therein, the peaceful silence of the Sarah. "That was," he began, but the words wouldn't come. She smiled up at him here. "Yes, soft and content." "Yeah," she murmured, her voice drowsy with satisfaction. It was they stayed there for a long time, neither of them speaking, just enjoying the warmth of each other's presence. The tension that had been hanging over them was gone, replaced by a quiet understanding, a bond that went beyond words. Finally she shifted, sitting up and reaching for her towel. "We should probably get out of here before we pass out from the heat," she said with a light laugh. He smiled and nodded, reaching for his own towel. "Yeah, you're right." They dressed, insolence, the intimacy of them lingering in the air between them. There was no awkwardness, no regret, just a quiet understanding that something between them had changed as they stepped out of the SIA and into the cool air of the house. He glanced at her, unsure of what to say next, but she smiled at him here. "Yes, soft and warm." "We'll figure it out," she said simply, as though reading his thoughts. And somehow he knew they would.